The VW ID.4 is sitting in a very interesting position for the EV market that, honestly, I think could have been the position of the standard range Model Y, which, if you've been keeping up to date with my videos, you're aware that has been canceled. Elon has just flat out said they're not making it because it would be a range below 250 miles, but now here comes along the VW ID.4, which should be hitting city streets early 2021 in a more bulk of deliveries in the middle of 2021, so we're only a few months away from these actually being delivered to consumers, and it's starting at $40,000 with a 250 mile range estimated by the EPA. This is achieved via a rear-wheel drive system and around an 82 kilowatt hour battery pack, though it is a bit software limited, so around 77 kilowatt hours are actually accessible. And it is an electric crossover, so I think it makes sense to compare this pretty directly with the Tesla Model Y, because that is one of the most popular, one of the most talked about upcoming electric crossovers in the United States market. So how do these two compare to each other? Well, for one, I think it makes a whole lot of sense for VW to go after the 250 mile range, $40,000 demographic first, because that's an area where the Model Y is not really present. I gotta be honest with you, I'm pretty surprised that we're almost halfway through December and Tesla has still not announced or given any details on the cheaper single motor option for the Model Y, which I've been saying for months that's gonna be a big time bestseller. I think there's going to be a ton of people willing to buy a more affordable Model Y that can go further because that single motor system will be more power efficient. It won't have as much performance or as great traction control as the dual motor Model Y at $50,000, but Elon briefly hinted at it starting at around $45,000, so that would get closer to the VW ID.4, but still not quite as cheap. And also keep in mind, the ID.4 qualifies for the $7,500 federal tax credit, and that's not even considering state credits you can get in places like California. So after taxes and everything, that means out the door you might be actually spending $40,000, whereas with a Tesla, because they no longer qualify for the federal tax credit, you're going to be spending closer to $57,000 after tax, and you don't get that $7,500 off, which puts the VW ID.4 in this extreme position of affordability with decent range. For sure, 250 miles is not as amazing as the 326 the Model Y dual motor can achieve, but it is a whole lot cheaper, and I think there's a lot of people out there that can agree for most daily driving and for most average people that are charging from home, 250 miles covers the basics pretty well. Energy efficiency wise, obviously it's no question. The fact that the Model Y battery pack today with two motors is able to achieve a range almost 80 miles higher than what the ID.4 is able to achieve with a similar sized battery pack and one motor, yeah, no debate there. Tesla's still going to be the energy efficiency king, and there are a few tech specs where the Tesla I still think comes on top, but that makes sense because it's more expensive. Things like the peak charging rate, which are around 250 kilowatts for the Tesla Model Y, whereas on the ID.4 it's limited to around 125 kilowatts, but there's more to the story there, because from what I'm hearing of the early reviews of the ID.4, they're saying that that 125 kilowatt charge rate is sustained all the way up to 80%, whereas sure, the Model Y and Model 3 can support 250 kilowatt charge rates. They're only like that at the very beginning of your charging, and then they taper off and slow down pretty substantially, so it may seem like a slower charging vehicle, but on paper they're actually pretty close. The other bigger advantage to the Tesla, in my mind, would be the technology involved. So the VW ID.4 design-wise does look fairly approachable, does look a bit more standard. It doesn't have a frunk, which is a bit of a bummer, but definitely no deal breaker. But the hardware and the design on the inside is still going for quality, but definitely more emphasis on having tactile feedback and buttons, and Tesla, as we know, likes to be a bit more minimal. So this is obviously going to be a subjective thing, but knowing that Teslas have things like the full self-driving computer and are going to get consistent over-the-air updates, personally, I just think Tesla's software looks a bit more modern, a bit more futuristic, and seamless with how our smartphones and tablets operate, whereas the ID.4 still gives me a little bit of that kind of crappy car UI that we're so used to, and typically end up wanting to use just CarPlay or Android Auto because that is going to handle software better than the manufacturer actually is. And there are some autonomous features on the ID.4 like adaptive cruise control and lane centering filtering, but obviously you're not going to get anything as fancy as, you know, Tesla's full self-driving package, which does, you know, cost an astounding $10,000, whereas on the ID.4, pretty much all of the autonomous driving features are standard, so they're not going to try to upcharge you to access certain autonomy features. But I would say the Tesla probably has much more room for growth in the future to over-the-air updates getting better and achieving level 4 autonomy, hopefully level 5 autonomy someday, whereas ID.4, they don't really seem to be making that promise, and I doubt the ID.4 will ever get to a point where it's, you know, stopping at stoplights and making turns and handling roundabouts, whereas the Tesla, we can see them achieving that right now. But I still think the ID.4 hitting the market is going to be very compelling for a lot of car buyers out there. We do know the crossover segment is an extremely popular one, and it doesn't have 7 seats, but still has over 60 cubic feet of cargo space, and you can lay down those back seats. You've got the powered lift gate on the back, so you've still got a lot of storage space. You can still sit 5 fairly comfortably, and the performance from what we've heard is not quite as good as the Tesla, but I feel like most people buying crossovers are going to be kind of suburban families that are driving the kids around, and there's definitely some people that don't have as much of an interest in autonomous driving features or even in over-the-air updates. And it feels like the ID.4 is trying to bridge that gap from going from an internal combustion engine vehicle to an electric vehicle much more smoothly. So there is a one-pedal driving option, but it's not on by default. And the earlier impressions videos are telling us that the ID.4 feels and drives a lot like a gas car. It feels very familiar. And some people probably need that to make the transition over to electric. So to know now that there's a $40,000 250-mile range crossover that after tax credits will start to lower you down below $40,000, I definitely think a lot of people could end up going for it. I'm curious to see how it's going to perform with the rest of the Tesla lineup. And for the record, I think the automotive space is big enough for everyone. It's not like the Model Y is in trouble or the Model Y is gonna die. It's just that there's another option for maybe people who weren't willing to spend $50K on a Model Y that just has to compromise in a few areas. But of course, the ID.4 probably has some advantages depending on your personal preferences. For me, at least, Tesla supercharging access would be one of the biggest advantages of going with a Model Y, knowing how widespread that network is and how simple and integrated charging is. But one way the ID.4 is able to combat that is with the 3 years of included free charging at any Electrify America charge station, which is pretty much second place when it comes to charger availability across the US. And knowing that you get 3 years for free, no matter how much you charge, is pretty sweet. Teslas aren't even offering that. You just get the 1,000 miles of free supercharging when you use the referral code and that kind of thing. So not bad option from VW. And I do want you guys to know that I keep my eyes on other EV companies out there a lot, but I know that Tesla's the one most people like talking about. But still, I couldn't help but bring up the ID.4 in today's video just because I feel like VW is accurately looking at this vacant spot in the crossover electric market that Tesla has left by not announcing the standard range Model Y and just been like, hey, why don't we start there? That seems like a good spot. And I definitely think there's a lot of people that would appreciate an electric vehicle of this style with this functionality at that price point. So good on you, VW. Keep up the good work. And Tesla, can we please get some new information on that single motor Model Y? Because knowing that the dual motor variant is capable of doing 326 miles on a charge, imagine what single motor could do. I wouldn't be surprised if it's like 340 miles for a $45,000 electric crossover. Then, yeah, I could see a lot of people just wanting to opt for the Tesla instead of the ID.4. But what would you guys choose? Feel free to let me know. Thank you all for watching. Hope you have an excellent rest of your day. Take care.